Welcome to Practical Parapsychology. Join your PhD host Drs. Brian Laith and Cindy Little as they arm you with the latest scientific research and know-how on ghostly phenomena. Brian is the lead author of the groundbreaking new book, Ghosted, Exploring the Haunting Reality of Paranormal Encounters, and Cindy is the proprietor of WacoGhost.com, a portal for professional investigations and public education on ghostly phenomena. Together, with their recurring guest, parapsychologist Dr. James Huren, they will take important steps with you to gain scientific answers about the nature of the paranormal experiences and the people who have them. For more information on practical parapsychology, visit their website at www.practicalparapsychology.com. Practical Parapsychology. The class is now in session.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Practical Parapsychology. I'm Brian Laith here with Cindy Little, the investigation queen. Say hello, Cindy.
Hello, hello.
And today, guys, we're going to take a bit of a break. Actually, hold up. I want someone to praise me for the fact that I actually had the microphone working at the very start of the show.
Yeah, you were like ready to go out the gate today.
We're going to keep pretending that's the case. Yes.
Yeah.
So, guys, we're going to take a break. If you've been listening to our episodes, we've been talking for the last few episodes about the Survey of Strange Events and how you can use this standardized scientific scale to kind of help break down case studies or use it to measure basically people's experiences in terms of what they've had with hauntings and related phenomena. But we thought we'd give you guys a break today, and we would get down and dirty with the basics. So today we're going to talk a little bit about field investigations, right? So actually going out there and doing ghost hunting or doing, formal investigations of places that are purportedly haunted. Purportedly, right? That's a fancy word. Can't write a research article without the word purportedly. So first thing I thought we'd start John about, Cindy, and I'm going to let you talk a little bit more than me today, hopefully. Actually, let's be fair, that's probably not going to happen because...
We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. We'll just own it. We'll own it. Guys, from the book Ghosted, we've divided investigations. And I want to say before we move into this, that, when we were thinking about how we could divide and type investigations, we went for, the whole kit and caboodle. So, a lot of this stuff, or I should say the way we've split investigations divide into kind of three categories. And if there's a team out there that is truly devoted enough to run a single incident or a single location through all three of these, you have absolutely done your duty. But I think something that Cindy and I will be talking about is sometimes it's hard to get through all three types of this with one particular location. There's lots of stuff that can get in your way. So in terms of our division, right, we have stage one, which we call case documentation, right? People, history, case studies, environmental examination. And then you move to stage two, which we call exploratory studies. And this is where you do an initial investigation to try and document, hopefully, some phenomena. And then our stage three, which is actual hypothesis testing, which is where you get in and decide that you're going to formally try to study or test various hypotheses related to paranormal phenomena. But why don't we start with case documentation, and I will shut up and let Cindy give her 2 cents on what are your highs and lows in doing, stage one, doing the background work.
Basically, I start with talking to witnesses or experiences, experience, another name to put to it, but just interviewing them and just trying to find out more about the case and what they're experiencing and where and when. And that usually tells me a whole bunch. And especially I try to start with open-ended questions, like, hey, just what's going on here? What's been going on? And that usually goes a long way. But then I always try to keep at the back of my mind that the activity could be related to a person or people versus place. So I always like to ask questions about the people there. It's like, have you experienced these things elsewhere? Have you experienced these types of things throughout your life? When did these things start? I look for a possible catalyst on activity. Who was here when this started? I mean, I can't tell you how many cases I've had where say, oh, everything was great. And all of a sudden we had this strange activity kick up. Oh, okay. Well, have y'all been here the entire time? Well, no, actually, Judy came to work at about the time that the activity started. And I'm like, oh, really? Well, let's talk to Judy. Judy, what do you think about? Oh, yes, I've had experiences like this all my life, blah, blah, blah. Wherever I go, I seem to see ghosts. And that really gives me an opportunity to figure out where to go next. And that tells me a whole lot about the case and where the activity may be focused around. It may be focused around a specific person or people versus a place.
And that's been my experience too, and maybe a little bit less pronounced. I mean, more so now that we've devised haunted people syndrome, right? Which is really part of what you're talking about there, right? So is it a place that people have walked into, or is it a person that for whatever reason seems to be having a lot of paranormal experiences over an extended period of time, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know about you, but if you start digging in and digging into the history with those people, they will very often have childhood stories, right?
Yes.
Or I think of one of the cases we did for some papers. The lady that we interviewed, not only was it following around her with several houses, but her grandmother was supposedly sensitive, and she was
Yeah.
reporting stuff at 3 and 4 years of age,
Mhm.
that were spectacular if true, right? Putative
Mhm.
experiences, right? I just keep saying
Yeah.
that, putative. um
Putative.
yeah, putative. But
Yeah.
let's back up a little bit though, because you said the magic words with an interview. um open-ended questions, right?
Yes.
So what are some of the, this is a good practical question. What are some of the difficulties in getting histories and information from witnesses and experiencers?
Well, you either have the ones who don't like to talk and will be very short and with their answers, and kind of, yeah, well, yeah, no. But more often than not, I have people that want to unload. It's kind of like, finally somebody is here to listen to me and believe what I'm saying. And they end up going down all these crazy rabbit trails. And so just trying to sift through the information they're giving me with even that initial question of, hey, what's going on here, can be a little bit difficult. And that's where I always like to jot down notes, or sometimes I'll have my audio recorder on so I can go back and kind of sift through what they were saying, because a lot of times it's really hard to kind of get to the core phenomena of what's going on, because they'll start talking about, well, this happened here but when I was little. And you're absolutely right. I tell you what, if I had $1 for every time somebody said my grandmama has the gift, I'd be a rich
Oh
woman.
yeah.
I I mean, that seems to be really common, where these types of abilities or sensitivities run in families. But yeah, just trying to rein people in and trying to actually get them to stop talking and answer follow-up questions.
Yeah.
It's challenging. Yeah.
Well, and that's where you and I are biased for different reasons. Because of course I know a lot of your research is much more qualitative as opposed to
Yes.
quantitative. But we've both done a lot of interviews or laboratory work, and we've had psych training, and so I think it's good for the listenership to remember that you've got to develop a certain skill set in not letting either the client lead the interview,
Mhm.
or you accidentally putting words in their mouth or setting them up for and I got to be honest, that's not an easy thing to train in. I mean, interviewing technique either comes with skill and time, right?
Mhm.
And often mistakes,
Mhm.
or you maybe have a clinical background. But for all the lay people out there, I think it's really important to remember that your questions, practical piece of advice one when interviewing, your question should in no way be leading. Don't start with tell me how the haunting occurred, right? Or tell me how the demon first entered your body, right? Start with what happened first.
Mhm.
Just questions that don't have implications about what basically them telling you what you want to hear, or telling you what um basically would fit into your existing worldview.
Yeah, and that is, oh my gosh, that is so important. I'm glad that you touched on that. And that's why I always start out with a very neutral, what's going on here or what's been going on.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to fall into that trap of, yeah, so tell me about your experiences or your haunting experiences or your paranormal experiences. And yeah, you want to be very, very careful of that, because just for that very reason, you're leading them down a path.
And
And
of
even
course,
with, oh yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was saying, and then there's the other side of the coin, which is you can be too gentle, and now suddenly you have their great grandma's history of gout and bursitis. And when they tried to pull the teeth out of their great grandfather when he was drunk one night, and it just doesn't
Mhm.
relate to anything, even though it does make a very interesting story, so to speak. So there
Yes.
is a fine balance there.
There is. And more than anything, finding that balance comes with practice. And practice interviewing.
Yeah.
It's not a natural skill for most people. It's something that you have to learn, and it's always helpful to have an interview guide, at least something that can keep you and the person you're interviewing on topic, and have a few of those open-ended general questions written down ahead of time. But yeah, interview your family members, interview your friends, and get comfortable with that, because it is a skill. And so, yeah, striking that balance between getting the information that you need without a bunch of superfluous stuff,
Yeah.
and kind of guiding the conversation politely so they don't shut down. I mean, these are kind of things that are just by feel more than anything, because it's going to be a little bit different for each person that you're talking to.
Well, and in a practical sense, I think like most things, you have people that are, personality trait and background inclined to learn it, and then you have people who just aren't going to be good at doing it. So, one thing to do for people that are really gung ho about doing investigations is look around your group and find the personable people, right? Find
Yes.
the people that are empathetic, and then give them the assignment. Right, to go
Mhm.
home and practice interviewing 5 or 6 of your people. um, you know you have to look, there's a little bit of management involved, right, in
Mhm.
in running a good investigation group. So find the right person and then give them the homework, and then in turn they can get a little bit better at it, and with time they become a real pro.
Mhm. Yeah, and I completely agree. And you want to give some thought ahead of time too to what kind of information are you after? I
Yep.
mean, are you after information about the people that are there, and the types of people that they are, and the types of experiences they've had, kind of their history, or are you more interested in what is actually going on at the place? The Are you trying to isolate the anomalous activity and where it happens? And so you want to just kind of think about all of these things. And that is going to help you focus on what types of questions to ask and what types of follow up to ask as well.
Yeah.
So, you want to make sure you're getting what you want and what you need.
Yep. Well, we have hit our first break, so we'll be back in just a moment with more practical parapsychology, guys. Stay tuned. welcome back, everybody. And so we're gonna jump right back into the conversation because we are missing, I think, the numbers guy. I'm going to say the most crucial thing about interviewing procedure, which is get dates and get times.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, because particularly if you're ever thinking about moving that information, right? So if some of you guys out there at some point want to turn some of your research, your investigations into a study, what makes parapsychologists really happy is if you have times, dates, and places for all of the stuff that you've gotten from the interview. Because that chronology sometimes, right, will actually allow us to run some mathematical analyses about increases and decreases in frequency of phenomena over time. And there's lots of other analysis we can do too. So one of the really important kind of practical points I'm going to hammer on is timestamp, timestamp, timestamp. And if they don't have an exact hour and second, they can certainly note the day or about the week, somewhere, just place that chronology of history that you're collecting in time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What would you add to that, Cindy? What else should we be looking for?
No, I think that is great. And in fact, one of the first things I do when I go into a case is make the suggestion of, would you mind keeping a journal? And just jot down when things happen, who is there, what time. I said it's very important because it's going to help us find patterns to the activity. Now, I will say it's a challenge getting the people to actually do the journaling,
Sure.
but when they do, it is very helpful. Yes, because there's a wealth of information in, place, time, duration. Yeah, anything numerical is extremely helpful in pattern finding. And that's what we want. We want to figure out what's going on and when, so we can test that, or we can observe it ourselves, or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that makes me think of another component where we need to go backwards before we even get to the interview, which is, in my experience, it's good to have a nice, lengthy conversation with the people up front before any of this happens, making it very clear about what you do and what you don't do, right?
Mm-hmm.
As well as, do you have an understanding of how involved this process is going to be? Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're both researchers. So all the time we're having to tell people if they're doing studies, hey, let's be honest about the time commitment here. Right. And of course
Yeah.
we deal with attrition too. Right. With our whisper study, Cindy, how many people were going to show up and how many people actually showed up? Yeah.
Like a tenth.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, you need to make sure, because there's if we make an assumption psychologically that these people are in distress, right? You do not want to poke a bear by adding a bunch of surprises and a bunch of materials and a bunch of time, time commitments for
Mm-hmm.
surveys and scales and interviews and histories,
Mm-hmm.
without giving them notice. They
Yeah.
very much may not want to do that. And I would also say, in my experience, by having that conversation up front, particularly with residential investigations, and saying, this is what we do, this is what it's going to involve, this is what we don't
Mm-hmm.
do, it tends to weed out the people who were hoping for kind of like quick attention.
Yeah.
Or because this is not me disparaging people that have had legitimate experiences, but there are some people out there that are just real excited about the idea of being involved in a ghost investigation, and they may or may not be telling you the truth, right? So before you waste hours and hours and hours of time, or invest your team's time, because have you ever gone to a place and had a no-show, Cindy?
I haven't had a no-show, but I'm glad that you touched on this because it is very important. And I'll get to my story here in just a second. But this is one of the main reasons why if people contact me, and they're usually residential cases, I don't do residential cases anymore, but they would be like, "Oh my goodness, we have a ghost. You need to come out and help us." And I'd say, "Well, what's going on here?" But yeah, and then I would tell them exactly what you're talking about. It's like, "Well, this is what I do. This is what I would be able to do. Is this okay?" And I have at least 2 or 3 conversations on the phone with them or through email before I even decide whether or not I want to come out to the location. Because, yeah, you can end up wasting your time and your team's time, and you can end up going to an active location, not being prepared and making things worse and stirring things up. But yeah, which leads to my story, not stirring things up, but we had a residential case. This was many years back. And we're like, okay, yeah, it's in an old historic cotton gin and people are living there. They remodeled the house. This looks really interesting and had some interesting activity. We went out there. I kid you not, Brian. It was a barbecue. They had like 30 people there. Yeah. Beer, brats, burgers, the whole deal. That the yard was filled with people, the house was filled with people because the ghost hunters were coming. and,
Yeah.
and,
Well,
and it's like, great, okay, well, we can sit here and have a hamburger and talk about ghosts. And I mean, we went through and tried to do a little bit of, we took some pictures, tried to take some EMF readings, but we would have, each of us would have like 5 or 10 people just following us around going, shh, 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 oh, what are they doing now? What are you doing? Oh my gosh. Oh, I think they're taking readings. It was a disaster. I mean,
yeah.
there was it was a total waste of our time. And if they were even remotely interested in finding out if there was paranormal activity going on at their residence or not, it was a waste of time for them. But I think more than anything, there are a lot of times, and I don't want to say a lot, but there are sometimes people, they're just bored and they just want some Saturday night entertainment. So let's put on the barbecue and invite ghost hunters over.
Although in fairness, you should have, emergency protocol beta, which is you should have just left all the stuff in the car, sat down in the lawn chairs, had a hot dog and drank some beers and talked shop for a while. I mean, you were there.
Yeah.
They already had a party going.
Yeah.
That would have been my strategy. I just would have told the team to lock everything up in the car and just have a sit down and
hang out.
Yeah. They're like, might as well have some fun. I've actually had more serious issues with that. And I remember a long time ago, I want to say almost 12, 13 years ago, I had a case manager at the time and she set this up. But I was suspicious right off the bat because it was like, yes, our baby is floating out of its crib in midair while bleeding blood from its ankles. And people are being beaten unconscious by a demon. And, I expressed my suspicion, but at the time I'm like, well, there's case manager's in charge. And we drove there and lo and behold, no one would answer the door and we could actually see somebody peeking through the window because they changed their mind. So yeah, I mean, you have to vet these cases. And I think without, making too much fun, residential cases need a lot of testing before, for everyone's safety. Before you get into them. Because yes, I have also had several back in the day where there were 4 or 5 guests that got invited to the investigation. And it's like, I need all of you to leave. I need you to go away. We can't do this with you here because you're going to contaminate the living hell out of everything. And, sometimes that went well. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes we could keep them on a porch. Sometimes we ended up running a very short investigation and just packed up our stuff because we're like, this isn't going to be good material. There's too many confounds. We're not going to be able to make any cases out of this. So, yeah, people management is definitely a skill I think that investigators have to develop.
I completely agree. And yes, I've had to cut short many residential investigations for those exact same reasons. It's like, this is a total waste because you're absolutely right. They invite everybody over. It's like, oh my goodness, the ghost hunters are here, and I had this one case where it took just every fiber of my being to be patient with this 16-year-old girl that literally stuck to my side and was asking questions the entire time, nonstop. Well, what are you doing now? Well, what's that? Well, what is that for? Well, how come you're going into this room? Well, haven't you gone into that room yet? Well, why not? I mean, it was driving me nuts. And so, and I'm just like, please go away. Shut up. Go away. And I mean, I understand the curiosity, but yes, people management is a huge part of it, especially in residential cases. And you're usually, unlike a business situation or a historic building, you're kind of cramped up in a little house. You're
Yeah.
all kind of getting on top of one another, and that's difficult as well. And so yeah, you talk about, again, the dirty test tube of field work. It doesn't get much dirtier than a 3-bedroom, two bath rancher that's filled with 10 people.
Yeah.
And the TV is on, and the dog is barking, and the cats are running around, and it's a bust. I mean, there's
Yeah.
really nothing you can do.
And I would say at that point, there is not even a point in setting up equipment or trying to set up anything because there's too much going on. So, maybe one thing to kind of more neutrally wrap this up is, if there's anybody out there listening who thinks they may have a haunting in their location, you need to understand that scientists, right, or good investigators have to remove confounds. And you, as a person that lives there, are a confound, right?
Yes.
So the option is you either have one of your investigation team literally follow the people in the house around and document everything they're doing, assuming it's a large enough space for that to happen. But the very point that, if they're roaming around, if the people that live in that house are roaming around, footsteps, coughing, television noise, the dog, the cat purring, almost the dog purring. I'm like, yeah. So unfortunately, right, you've got to have a quiet, clean environment to do these investigations in any way that are going to provide you with evidence that's reliable. Right. So, just as an FYI, guys, if you ever want a group to investigate, if they're a decent group, they're going to ask you to leave. Or they're going to restrict you to one room, and worse, it's going to be like you're in a prison cell because they're going to ask you to be quiet and not make a lot of noise. Because if you don't, you've destroyed any evidence and the whole point of the team coming out in the first place. Yeah. So, but it is break time again, so we will be back in just a minute with more practical parapsychology.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Welcome back to Practical Parapsychology, everybody. So let's switch gears a little bit, Cindy. Let me start this off by asking you a question. Because do you take environmental baselines? Do you try and get like EMF baselines before you actually do an investigation, or do you do that in the actual exploratory stage?
I usually do that in the actual exploratory stage. I mean, it depends on access. Sometimes I'm only allowed access for one night or one day. Sometimes I'm allowed access previous to an investigation, which is really cool. But usually it's during the exploratory phase. I will go in and I will take EMF baselines. I will take photographs. I will take video of the environment, as well as I will also take just memos to myself if I notice something unusual. It's like, oh, gee, they have an especially loud air conditioner that kicks on, or they have pets, or, just something to kind of get a feel for the environment. But yeah, I usually do that at the beginning of an
Yeah.
investigation.
And so, that's kind of the point. So we were talking before about case documentation, right? So one way to think about it is the first stage of a good investigation is getting the histories of the people, right? Getting the histories of the location. Although different groups have different, I guess maybe emphasis or desire for actually doing historical documentation, right, of the location or the people. In other words, like going to the county library and looking up records. We're going to get to that in a second, because otherwise I'm going to derail. So, but exploratory is when you actually send a team in to try and capture initial phenomena. Basically, you actually get a feel of the location, or the person focus that's in a particular location, for capturing phenomena. So we're going to move to that in a second, because I want to talk to Cindy about some of the methods she uses. But what's your take on history? Where do you place actual, like chronological history? Not the person statements, but like, in 1824, this house was used as a,
Oh, I love it. I love it. In fact, one of the people that I investigate with is, she's an incredible historical researcher. And I use history for a couple of different things. First of all, I use it to find out more about the property, which is important because there may be something inherent in how the structure is built or something that could be contributing to what people are thinking of as paranormal activity when it's really not paranormal at all. I think of a story of a house that was built of cinder blocks, and they were using styrofoam as insulation in the cinder blocks. And the house was sitting up against a hillside where there used to be a landfill. So you can kind of see where this is going. I know it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so what was happening is methane gas was leaking into the house, and static electricity was causing these balls of light to ignite inside of their house. And yeah, scary. I mean, really spooky stuff, but completely natural.
I need to poke though a little bit and say, who was able to verify? I mean, are we talking like combustible gases and like poof, there went a ball of flame?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. Now, in all fairness, this wasn't my case. This was somebody else's case that they were telling me about it. But I thought it was really interesting. They thought they had some kind of supernatural ball lightning or something coming down their chimney and sparking up from the floor. And no, it was methane gas combusting.
I do have to admit, once I got used to that, I would try and light a cigarette off of one of the, just to say that I did it. I'd be like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that'd be pretty tough. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'd
maybe
like to see that.
well, I don't have any hair, so I mean, maybe my facial hair would burn off, but it still, I could claim bragging rights at least for several months. So
that would be so awesome. But yeah, the other thing that I use historical research for is I have friends that I investigate with who are psychics, and they are able to provide a lot of times names, dates, places that are historically verifiable about the property or about things that supposedly happened at the property. And so I think that, yes, historical information is invaluable in triangulating psychic testimony, especially.
Okay, well, let me ask you, since Jim's not here, right, to raise a ruckus,
Yes.
let me step in and be the skeptic and say, how do you blind your psychics so that at least you have some belief of knowledge that the information they're getting isn't from their own research?
That is a very good question, and that is something that I don't think that you can ever completely control for. So it is something to be careful of. Personally, I mean, the best I can tell you on that is I know my psychics very, very well. I mean, they're very good friends of mine, especially the guy that I'm working with now. He is very humble about his abilities, and he likes to go in cold. And an example of that on the Whisper study, he did some distance readings. And he was getting the impression, and I think I told you about this, he was texting me furiously, and he knew nothing about the whispers, nothing about the history of it. And he's, we were talking about up in the bedroom, we thought there was the death of a son. And it was I think Jesse's room or something, the son, Jesse. And my psychic friend Robbie was saying, I do not sense any presence of any sons in this family. I just don't. I'm not getting that. I'm sensing a whole bunch of girls, though. Like there was a bunch of girls that were living in that home at one time. And so later on, when I had a little bit of time, I went downstairs when we were at the Whispers and looked through their historical documents. And sure enough, over the course of many years, they had several daughters, but no son named Jesse. Jesse was the wife who died in the room upstairs.
Yep.
And so, little things like that set me off on trying to verify some things and kind of correct the story a little bit. So, and could he have done some research on the Whispers? Absolutely. I really don't think that he did, but you bring up a very valid point.
Well, APA guidelines clearly state that all psychics need to be kept in a prison cell and chained at all times until the actual time of the investigation. Look it up on Google. It's real. No, there is. Well, and speaking of which, and I'm saying this, I'm saying this on the record as we're recording, we need to get down to Texas and actually run trials on your PFR, your psychic friend Robbie, because
he's awesome.
From what I've seen, he really seems to have some talent. I'd love to put him in lab conditions and see what he can do. That would be fun. That would be an exciting trip.
Fun for you. I don't think he would like that so well.
No, we'd make it friendly and happy. A nice cup of tea, give him some cookies, right? Take regular breaks. That's one of the criticisms I've been leveraging in parapsychology land, which is human beings are human beings. And just like if you put a bag on somebody's head when they're trying to do free throws, and you're like, oh no, it's only legitimate if you put a bag over their head. That's the only way you can prove that they can do free throws. It's like, it's a human trait. People need to be comfortable. People need to not feel like they're imprisoned, right? Because you want to maximize that ability. And I think there's a lot of ways to do controls without making someone feel like, they're about to take the SAT from, circa 1992, where there was 50 of you in a room with a nun and a ruler and pencils and, it's a damn nightmare. But no, that's my point is if I did it, he would be a comfortable psychic indeed. There would be treats.
Okay.
There would be treats.
All right. I will let him know. I will let him know that. But just to kind of dovetail off of that, I was talking to my class the other day. I'm teaching my paranormal investigation class at the community college, and we were taking out the Zener cards and playing with the Zener cards. And for those of you who don't know, those were cards that were developed by a psychologist, Carl Zener, back in the 1930s. He worked with the Rhines and to use to test ESP. If you've watched any of the Ghostbusters movies, Bill Murray was using them. It's the cards with the circles, the squiggles, the stars, and they're used to see if people can predict what the next card is going to be, or if you're concentrating on a card, can somebody figure out what that card is, etc. So just some kind of basic ESP testing they don't use the cards anymore, but we were using them in my class. And I said, can you imagine having to go through these cards? Like, I don't know how many runs they did and there's like 25 cards in a deck. Yeah. Hundreds upon hundreds of runs, and how fatigued you would be and how bored you would be. And then to have people go, oh, well, they don't have any psychic ability. I mean, they're doing a terrible job with these cards. And then you're already in a laboratory situation where it's very sterile with these strangers, and you're doing this incredibly mind-numbing task. I'm a huge, and I'm not going to jump off on too big of a rabbit trail here, but I'm a huge advocate of field work when it comes to researching the paranormal. I just am. I think there's stuff that we can take from the field back to the lab, but I think there's so much to be learned from field work.
Although since I went down the rabbit hole and I fed you some of the rabbit hole that you ran down,
Yeah.
um, let me back up though and say, about history. When I say that some people are for it and some people aren't for it, the real issue is, I think, for historical research, whether or not you want to vet the claims that people say about the house, right?
Yes.
Because I don't know about you, but I've been in situations where the owners of a supposed place have said one thing, right? But the history has been totally debunked. Right?
Yes.
You go to the county courthouse and find out that none of it is true. And then there's others where there does seem to be historical evidence. But I will also say, as an interesting, and this may be heresy, some investigators may be mad at me, but I do not find a strong relationship between the history of a place and phenomena occurring.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's not related, but some of the best stuff I've ever got at Black Moon Manor, all of the claims that they made were thoroughly debunked. None of the stuff that they claimed about the house that supposedly made it haunted was actually true at all. And yet, just phenomenal, phenomena that occurred there over several investigations over several years. I also think of Bobby Mackey's about 2 hours from here, where it is documented that supposedly, I think 2 men ritually sacrificed a woman,
Wow.
supposedly to the devil. Wasn't there? Don't know. You
Yeah.
gotta ask, right?
Mhm.
Which demon in particular did you sacrifice this lady to?
Yeah.
But I've been to Bobby Mackey's a couple times and haven't gotten much of anything.
Mhm.
Now other people have reported phenomenal stuff, but I that's something I really would hope we could get some other parapsychologists investigating, and it wouldn't be a hard study to do. Really, in fact, it's something we could probably coordinate ourselves over time on Practical Parapsychology, which is, hey guys, throw in your histories and throw in your phenomena. Right? Let's do a spreadsheet on this and let's see what the actual relationship between trauma and drama and death and all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
really is between the stuff that you're reporting and experiencing, right? Reporting experiencing when you go there and investigate. Just
Yeah.
a thought.
Well, no, and I completely agree. And this is a spot where historical information may backfire on you. And what I mean by that is, I've been in many situations where, okay, we've got the backstory to this spooky location, and yes, we've got the axe murderer that is in the back room, and da 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 da, the whole deal. Well, what happens is that people will come in and they will experience something like phantom footsteps or voices or something, and they automatically connect it to the historical narrative.
Yes.
Automatically. Those footsteps are the footsteps of the axe murderer. I just know it. Or
Yeah.
the child. Oh, here's a big one. It's like every haunted place seems to have a dead child running around.
Or two.
And
Sometimes
or
two.
two. Yeah. The dead children are everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you hear strange noises or singing or any number of things. It's automatically, oh, that's little so and so. And so that's where I can kind of see it backfiring. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
really look at what you've got here. You have a historical narrative and you have some unusual, as yet to be identified sounds. That's it. You don't have a correlation here. So, but our minds want to make those connections,
Yeah.
and so it's really hard to get past sometimes.
Which brings us to yet another break, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll be back with Practical Parapsychology in just a minute. Okay, welcome back, everybody. You know what? I'm going to jump right back from our previous statement and make a quick, another controversial statement and say, related to, makes me think of Sharon Hill and what she referred to as legend tripping, right?
Hmm.
So people getting so caught up in the story, right, as part of the adventure and part of the fun, that they start molding, right, all of their experiences to fit that narrative that they've been given. Right.
Yeah.
Which is a very natural psychological thing to do. But I'm going to, and I also hear kind of like Jim's skepticism yelling in my ear. I've been working with him for too long. He would probably mandate, and I got to say it, I would agree with him. It's less fun. Right. But I would agree with the statement that chances are, if you're going to do that history research, you should probably only keep it among the person that's a historian until after the investigation's over.
I think that's smart. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Because otherwise you're feeding a narrative and a story to people that they're going to end up psychologically, either consciously or unconsciously, trying to fit. And so, now granted, if you get some nice O phenomena, it's still nice O phenomena if you've captured it appropriately. But you're going to start getting stories and narratives. And I can certainly think of a few times where I've had to talk some investigators out of a highly complicated narrative where, little girls need to be rescued because they're dead and being tortured by evil spirits. And
Yeah.
of course, like the ghost box growls or something, and they just get very upset and disappointed. But one way to prevent that, and one way to keep your investigators clean and objective, is to not share the background history. It's good to have it, to check it out and vet what the claims are. But it's probably also fair to say that there's no such thing as really keeping investigators clean. Because I'm Cindy, I'm sure you looked up the whispers a little bit before we did our study, right?
Little bit, but not
Yeah.
too much.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we knew you wouldn't, right? Because we asked, but that's the point is, particularly if it's a famous place or a entrepreneur place, right, where you charge money because it's got good phenomena, those stories are all out there.
Yes.
So and your average investigator may do their own digging. So
Yes.
probably important to say it's hard to put controls on that sort of thing, but probably a good idea to kind of control it as much as you can. Does that seem like a middle ground to you?
I think that's appropriate. I really, really do. And like I said, there again, I take a little bit different approach to field work. I have a very much a qualitative research background, and I know that the qualitative people make the quantitative people a little nervous because everything's kind of fuzzy and mushy, and but I look at it and say, I don't know that there's any point in trying to control variables in field work, at least not initially. I think it's better to take an ethnographic approach where you walk in, you see what you see, you hear what you hear, you furiously try to consistently take data. And then once you have all of that gathered up, then you can start trying to isolate variables and then maybe eventually get into a situation where you can do some hypothesis testing. But a lack of control for variables for me, it's a non-issue. It's just
Yeah.
I think there's so much great information that if you can collect it consistently and analyze it well, you're going to come up with some really interesting stuff and stuff that you can quantify and
Yeah.
measure.
Well,
But initially, I really think that exploration, that kind of free exploration is important.
dirty hippie.
I know. I'm a hippie researcher. I
Well,
am.
no, I mean, I'm actually glad that you made that caveat because I was about to fight you. I was like, oh, heck no, you need to have controls. But no, I think particularly in case documentation, right?
Yes.
No, you need to let people do what they're going to do and you need to record all of it.
Yes.
Now, but you bring up there are controls, Cindy. I mean, you're saying there's not controls, but you have a method for your interview. You have consistent measurement across the people that, you may be collecting their stories, but you're collecting their stories in a systematic, constant way so you can compare across stories, right?
Yes. Yeah. You don't need to be all crazy chaotic about it. I mean, being organized and consistently collecting data is just going to help you in the long run. I mean, you have to be able to make sense of it, whether it's qualitative information or quantitative information.
Well, but I mean, I am going to harp on this. I think I am getting up on the pulpit. Hold on, I'm getting taller. Right. But no, measurement is crucial. Right. I used to tell my students all the time, if you measure half a house in centimeters and then half a house in inches, right, good luck given the building plans. Right. It's if you're using different measurements, if you're not being consistent in your measurement, you're done. Right. You're absolutely done, because now you can't meld that information together. Measurement is one of those key crucial components of science, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. And really, if we were talking to police investigators, they'd tell us the same thing, right? Have a consistent method so you can compare across. So I agree with you, and I'm not trying to disagree with you. I just want to make it clear to the listeners that you're saying, oh, I don't like controls, but really I would say you're not thinking about the 15 controls you automatically put in place when you're doing the interviews in the first place.
See, and I don't see those as controls. I just see that as well organized investigation. Because what I'm thinking about is trying to isolate variables down the road, actually measurable variables. And in the initial stages of an investigation, I need time to figure out what variables to isolate.
Yeah.
And then go from there and say, okay, we have some variables here. We think we can reasonably control for some confounds. And now we can, it's what you're talking about for me is something that comes a little bit further down the line. But initially it's like, let's just sit back and see what we see.
Yeah.
Let's hear what we hear, but let's at least have a plan in place. I mean, you got to be organized and have a little bit of structure in place. But, initially I don't see the point in trying to control things and isolate variables right away, because we really don't know what it's not the best use of, I don't see it as the best use of time initially. It's like, let's figure this out and figure out what we're going to concentrate on later once we become more familiar with the case or the environment.
Well, but I might say as a closing point, you might be committing the sin of every math professor I ever had, which was, well, of course I can do all these in my head. Can everyone? Well, no, sir. You've been doing it for 25 years and you're taking 7 steps automatically in your cerebral cortex that nobody else knows how to do. Right. So I would say, because I think, for instance, I don't want the listenership to hear you and go, oh, well, it's just a free flow. Well, no, it's not. Because
no.
Because if you don't collect, for instance, time and dates, right?
Yes.
Well, now you've interviewed everybody and you have a bunch of information, but guess what? Since you don't have those times, you don't know what came first.
Yes.
You don't know, right? So you're not able to dig as much into that information you collected, right? And draw out those patterns to know where to go next, right? So no, I'm going to be the school marm with a ruler. I'm going to be the nun with a ruler, and say, yes, it should be natural. It should flow. You should collect information, and we're not suggesting you put people in like small cells and give them the grilling, right?
Yeah.
But we are saying give some serious thought to the data you need to collect before you go in there and collect it in the first place. Because there's almost nothing worse than, I've got 4 hours of interview and it's worthless. Because I didn't collect time, I didn't collect dates, I didn't even, make notations about who I was talking to. And you would think something that small would not cause a problem, but it can destroy an entire set of data, an entire set of entries.
Yes. And those names, the dates, all of that is very, very important. And I'm going to make a plug for my favorite ghost hunting tool here at the end, and that is trail cameras, because they've got insane battery life. They see in the daytime, in the dark, they take video, they take audio if you get the more expensive ones. But to your point, they're time stamped.
Yes.
And so you have that information. And yes, whenever I talk to my students about taking field notes, yes, of course, you want to write down names, dates, times, all of that information. And so, like I said, I think we're talking about the same thing. We're just saying
no, we're not.
differently.
No, we're not.
Okay.
No, we're not.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are. We're just saying it a little bit differently. Like I'm saying, it's like, to me, that's part of the process of taking well organized notes and and having a data collection plan. That, yes, of course, it's going to include lots of qualitative kind of squishy fuzzy information, but it's also going to include, yes, the names, the dates, the times, because you need that for triangulation. You need that for verification. It's
Well,
super, super important.
Well, I'm going to be I'm going to be a Pharisee and say the 11th commandment of ghost hunting is time stamp and time sync.
Yeah.
And if you are not doing that, right? If you didn't time sync your various cameras, in other words, you don't have a common time to know, right? Useless data. That time stamp is everything.
It's very
Yeah.
important. Yes, very, very important. Yeah, and collecting points of data from multiple sources. I talk a lot about that to my students. Triangulate, triangulate, triangulate. It's going to add to the validity of the experience. And if you just have a weird EMF blip or an odd sounding EVP that stands on its own, to me, it's not standing on its own. It's just some little blip of something. I wouldn't even count it as data. I immediately dismiss it.
Yeah. Well,
so, yes.
Well, here's the thing though. See, we just got through stage 1. We didn't even get to stage 2 as usual, right? But we're almost out of time. So we're going to have to wrap this conversation up. And although let me give a little bit of a teaser to the listeners. Cindy and I with Jim are working on creating some standardized forms for investigators that we're eventually going to try and put up on the ISRE website, where people can use Google Forms to do preliminary interviews in a systematic way. And in some future episodes, we'll be talking about some scales that we're going to try and put up there too, to where if you want to kind of have some help doing background for investigations, we'll have some scales available. And some surveys where people can fill them out and you'll get some systematic information about their histories. We're not there yet. Be patient with us, but that's a heads up. So it seems like we are officially out of time. So Cindy, thank you for today.
Well, thank you. That's fun. I love talking ghost hunting.
Yeah, we've got
That's my favorite.
We got another 5 hours just talking about this. We can't. You guys will hear more of it. So hope you guys will tune in again next week. This was Practical Parapsychology, and until then, we hope you guys have a good day.